One of the strange burdens of our time, in our world of glowing screens and endless feeds, is a quiet, persistent feeling of being alone. Not the dramatic loneliness of being stranded on a desert island, but something more subtle and perhaps more troubling. The sense of being surrounded by people yet profoundly disconnected from them. You may know it well. It's a particular kind of modern despair, a sense of being a spectator to life rather than a participant, watching others live with an ease and authenticity that feels impossibly distant from your own experience. This is not a small problem, nor is it yours alone. Millions of us wake each day to this particular ache, this feeling that something essential is missing. We scroll through carefully curated images of others' happiness and feel the gulf widen between their lives and our own. We attend gatherings and smile through conversations that never quite reach the depth we crave. We perform our roles with increasing exhaustion, wondering if anyone sees the person behind the performance. And in the quiet moments, the Sunday evenings, the late nights, the early mornings, we feel it most acutely, a loneliness that no amount of connection seems to cure, a sense of alienation that persists despite our best efforts to belong. What makes this feeling so difficult is not just its presence, but the shame that accompanies it. In a world that celebrates connection, that offers us 1,000 tools for reaching out, feeling lonely can seem like a personal failure. We wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can't I simply be happy like everyone else appears to be? Why does the pressure to be interesting, to have something valuable to say, to maintain a brand in our social circles, leave me feeling more disconnected from who I actually am? But here is what we must understand. This is not a personal failing. This is a widespread symptom of our times, a quiet spiritual crisis affecting millions. The very structures of modern society, its emphasis on productivity, its worship of rationality, its demand for constant self-optimization, can leave us feeling cut off from the deeper, more mysterious parts of ourselves. We live in an age of unprecedented material comfort and technological connection, yet something essential feels missing. The soul, it seems, has been left behind. And this is precisely where Fyodor Dostoevsky enters our story. Over 150 years ago, this Russian novelist looked directly into the abyss of human loneliness and despair and refused to turn away. While others were celebrating the march of progress and the triumph of reason, Dostoevsky was writing about underground men who couldn't leave their rooms, about brilliant students who committed murder and were tortured by isolation, about intellectuals who lost their faith and found themselves alone in a meaningless universe. His characters are not comfortable. They are anxious, conflicted, suffering. They are us. But Dostoevsky was not a pessimist. He was something far more valuable, a realist who had been to the depths himself and returned with maps for the rest of us. He understood that the path through despair is not around it, but through it. He knew that loneliness is not something to be fixed with better social skills or positive thinking, but something to be understood, accepted, and even honored as a profound part of the human condition. He offers us not solutions, but something better, companionship in our struggle, and the permission to be fully, messily, beautifully human. In the pages that follow, we will meet some of Dostoevsky's most troubled characters, but we will meet them not as literary figures to be analyzed from a distance, but as mirrors for our own inner experience. Through them, we will begin to understand why we feel the way we do. And more importantly, we will discover that our loneliness, our despair, our sense of alienation, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs that we have refused to accept shallow answers to deep questions. They are signs of our humanity at its most sensitive and most awake. Before we meet these characters, we need to understand what Dostoevsky was doing in his novels. He was not simply telling stories. He was conducting experiments in human psychology decades before psychology became a formal science. His books are laboratories where ideas are tested not through abstract argument, but through living, breathing, suffering human beings. When we read about a character in Dostoevsky, we are not reading about someone else. We are reading about aspects of ourselves that we may have never fully acknowledged. His genius was in taking the thoughts we keep hidden, the feelings we're ashamed to admit, the contradictions we try to smooth over, and embodying them in characters so real, so uncomfortably familiar, that we cannot help but recognize ourselves in them. This is why his work remains urgently relevant to our mental health in modern society. He understood something that much of contemporary culture tries to deny, that human beings are not rational machines that can be optimized and fixed. We are mysterious, contradictory, often irrational creatures driven by needs we barely understand. And it is precisely in acknowledging this, in accepting our own complexity, that we begin to find our way forward. Let us begin with perhaps Dostoevsky's most troubling character, the underground man. He appears in a short novel called Notes from Underground, and from the first page, he warns us, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." This is not modesty. This is a man who has turned his consciousness into a prison. The underground man lives alone in a small room, his underground, and spends his days thinking. Not productive thinking, not creative thinking, but the exhausting circular thinking of anxiety and self-consciousness. He is paralyzed by his own awareness. When he tries to go to a party, he spends hours rehearsing what he will say, imagining every possible response, analyzing every social gesture, until the very act of being with other people becomes impossibly complicated. By the time he arrives, he is so tangled in his own thoughts that he can barely speak. He is too aware to simply live. Does this sound familiar? In our modern terminology, we might call this social anxiety or overthinking, but Dostoevsky understood it more deeply. The underground man is not just anxious, he is engaged in a profound protest against the world as it is being presented to him. He lives in an age, much like ours, that celebrates reason, progress, and scientific certainty. He is told that everything can be measured, calculated, predicted. That human beings, if only we understood the right formulas, could be perfectly happy and perfectly rational, and he rejects this utterly. His famous protest against 2 + 2 = 4 is not a denial of mathematics. It is a denial of a world that tries to reduce human life to mathematical certainty, that tries to eliminate paradox, mystery, and the messy, irrational aspects of being human. He would rather suffer, he says, than accept a world where everything is predetermined, and there is no room for free will, for spontaneity, for the unpredictable movements of the human heart. This is existentialism in its rawest form, the insistence that human existence cannot be reduced to formulas, that we are fundamentally free and fundamentally alone in our choices. And this freedom is terrifying. It is so much easier to follow rules, to let experts tell us how to live, to accept the prescribed paths. But something in us, the same something that makes us feel alienated in modern society, rebels against this. We sense that in accepting these easy answers, we are giving up something essential. The tragedy of the underground man is not that he thinks too much, but that he thinks alone. His consciousness has become a barrier between himself and others. He cannot simply be present with people. He is always analyzing, always performing, always aware of himself being aware. This hyper-consciousness, which should connect him more deeply to reality, instead cuts him off from it entirely. And here we must pause and acknowledge, this is an increasingly common feature of modern life. How many of us spend social gatherings partly removed, watching ourselves from the outside, narrating our own experience rather than living it? How many of us lie awake at night replaying conversations, analyzing what we said, imagining what we should have said? How many of us feel that we are living inside our heads rather than in the world? This is the underground man's gift to us. The recognition that this kind of alienation, this imprisonment in our own consciousness, is a real and profound form of suffering. It is not a personal failure. It is a predicament of being human in a world that often feels inhospitable to the human soul. If the underground man shows us the loneliness of overthinking, Raskolnikov, the protagonist of Crime and Punishment, shows us the loneliness of believing we are special, different, set apart from ordinary humanity. When we meet Raskolnikov, he is a brilliant student living in poverty in St. Petersburg. He is consumed by an idea, a theory that divides humanity into two types, the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary masses live conventional lives, following society's rules. But the extraordinary, the Napoleons, the great men of history, are permitted to transgress these rules if their actions serve some higher purpose. They are above ordinary morality. Raskolnikov believes he might be one of these extraordinary men. To test this theory, he commits murder. But the novel is not really about the crime itself. It is about what happens afterward, the complete psychological disintegration of a young man who has cut himself off from human fellowship. Here is the crucial insight. Raskolnikov's real crime is not the murder. His real crime is the pride that made him believe he could stand apart from and above other human beings. His extraordinary man theory is a form of extreme isolation dressed up as superiority. By declaring himself different, by refusing to accept his shared humanity with ordinary people, he has condemned himself to absolute loneliness. We see this isolation destroy him from the inside. His mother and sister visit, full of love and concern, and he can barely look at them. His friend Razumikin tries repeatedly to help him, and he pushes him away. He walks the streets of St. Petersburg, surrounded by thousands of people, and feels utterly alone, carrying his terrible secret like a wall between himself and the world. And here is where Dostoevsky's insight becomes uncomfortably relevant to modern life. We may not have murder theories, but how many of us carry our own versions of the extraordinary man complex? The pressure in modern society to be exceptional, to achieve something great, to stand out from the crowd. This pressure isolates us just as surely as it isolated Raskolnikov. When we believe we must be special, we cannot simply be ordinary. We cannot find comfort in the simple, common experiences of human life. We cannot admit our fears, our confusions, our need for help, because these would reveal us as merely human. And so we perform, we achieve, we project an image of success and confidence, all while feeling profoundly alone behind the mask. Raskolnikov's path to redemption, and this is crucial, does not come through more thinking or through proving himself extraordinary. It comes through humility. It comes when he finally kneels before Sonia, a young woman forced into prostitution to support her family, and confesses everything. Sonia, who has every reason to judge him, instead loves him. She does not love him because he is special or brilliant. She loves him because he is suffering, because he is human, because he needs love. This is how we overcome isolation in the Dostoevskian sense. Not by proving ourselves worthy of connection, but by surrendering the idea that we need to be worthy. By accepting that we are, in the end, as ordinary and as needy as everyone else. And that this ordinariness, this shared vulnerability, is not something to transcend, but something to embrace. It is the very ground of human connection. Now we come to perhaps Dostoevsky's most intellectually brilliant character, Ivan Karamazov from The Brothers Karamazov. If Raskolnikov shows us the isolation of pride, Ivan shows us the isolation of the rational mind, confronting a universe that refuses to make sense. Ivan is a young intellectual, brilliant and articulate. who has thought deeply about the big questions. Does God exist? Is there meaning in the universe? Why do innocent people suffer? And he has arrived at a devastating conclusion. If God does not exist, then everything is permitted. Without a divine source of meaning and morality, there is no objective foundation for ethics, no ultimate justice, no cosmic order that makes sense of our suffering. This is not an abstract philosophical problem for Ivan. It is a psychological catastrophe. Because if everything is permitted, if there is no inherent meaning in life, then what are we to do with ourselves? How are we to bear the terrible freedom of existence? How are we to make choices when there is no objective right and wrong to guide us? Ivan articulates what many of us feel but cannot name: the peculiar despair of living in a disenchanted world. In previous centuries, most people lived within grand narratives, religious, cultural, ideological, that told them who they were, what life meant, how to live. These narratives were not always true or healthy, but they provided a framework, a sense of belonging to something larger than oneself. Modern society has, for many of us, dismantled these frameworks. We have been taught to be skeptical, to question, to think for ourselves. This is in many ways liberating, but it also leaves us alone with our freedom in a way that can feel unbearable. We are each responsible for creating our own meaning, for choosing our own values, for constructing our own purpose. And this is exhausting. This is lonely. This is what we might call a spiritual crisis. Ivan's anguish goes even deeper. He cannot accept a world where innocent children suffer. He tells his brother Alyosha a series of horrifying stories about child abuse, and then declares that even if God exists, even if there is some ultimate harmony in the universe that will make sense of this suffering, he refuses to accept it. He returns his ticket to this divine plan. He would rather stand alone in a meaningless universe than accept a God who permits such horrors. This is moral courage taken to its logical extreme, and it leaves Ivan utterly isolated. He cannot believe in God, but he cannot live happily in a godless universe either. He is suspended between faith and nihilism, belonging nowhere, at home nowhere. His brilliant mind, which should liberate him, instead traps him in despair. What Dostoevsky understood, and what is so relevant to our mental health today, is that this is not just an intellectual problem. It is an emotional and existential one. Many of us live in Ivan's predicament. We cannot quite believe in traditional religious narratives, but we hunger for meaning, for purpose, for some sense that our lives matter in a larger scheme. And this hunger, unsatisfied, manifests as a deep, pervasive loneliness. We feel cosmically alone, adrift in an indifferent universe. The standard modern response to this is to turn to self-improvement, to therapy, to mindfulness, to tools that help us create our own meaning and manage our own emotions, and these can be valuable. But Dostoevsky suggests something more difficult, that perhaps this despair, this confrontation with meaninglessness, is not something to be solved, but something to be lived through, that it is in sitting with this despair, in feeling its full weight, that we become capable of genuine compassion for ourselves and others. This brings us to what is perhaps Dostoevsky's most challenging and most important insight, his perspective on suffering itself. Our instinct, especially in modern self-help culture, is to view suffering as the enemy. We are taught to minimize it, manage it, eliminate it through the right techniques or the right mindset. Suffering is framed as optional, as something that happens when we are not thinking correctly or not taking proper care of ourselves. And if we are suffering, we must be doing something wrong. Dostoevsky offers a radically different view. For him, suffering is not an aberration or a mistake. It is an inevitable part of the human condition, woven into the very fabric of existence. We suffer because we are conscious beings in an imperfect world, because we love and lose, because we desire and are disappointed, because we see possibilities that are never realized. This is not something to be fixed. This is what it means to be human. But, and this is crucial, suffering for Dostoevsky is not meaningless. It is, paradoxically, the very source of our deepest wisdom and our greatest capacity for love. It is through suffering that we become real, that we drop our pretenses, that we stop performing and start being. It is through suffering that we develop compassion, because we understand viscerally what it means to hurt. It is through suffering that we connect most deeply with others, because vulnerability is the language of authentic human relationship. In Crime and Punishment, it is Sonia's suffering that makes her capable of loving Raskolnikov despite his crime. In The Brothers Karamazov, it is the monk Zosima's acceptance of suffering that makes him a source of wisdom and comfort for others. These characters do not transcend their suffering. They transform it into compassion. This does not mean we should seek out suffering or romanticize it. Dostoevsky is not advocating for martyrdom. He is advocating for consciousness. He is saying, when suffering comes, and it will come, do not turn away from it. Do not numb yourself. Do not pretend it is not there. Sit with it. Feel it fully. Let it break you open. Because it is in being broken open that we become capable of genuine connection with ourselves and others. This is a difficult teaching in an age that promises us happiness if we just follow the right steps. But it is also a liberating one. Because if suffering is not a sign of failure, if it is simply part of being human, then we can stop punishing ourselves for feeling bad. We can stop adding the second layer of suffering, the shame and self-criticism, on top of the first. We can accept our pain as a sign not of weakness, but of our humanity at its most awake and most alive. We have spent time in the darkness with Dostoevsky's characters. We have seen ourselves in the underground man's paralysis, in Raskolnikov's isolation, in Ivan's despair. We have confronted the uncomfortable truth that loneliness and alienation are not personal failures, but profound responses to the conditions of modern existence, and perhaps to existence itself. Now comes the gentle turn, the reframing that makes this exploration not just bearable, but healing. Understanding Dostoevsky's diagnosis is the first step. The next is to use it not to despair further, but to find a strange and profound comfort. Because once we understand why we feel the way we do, once we see our struggles reflected in literature that has moved millions across centuries and cultures, something shifts. We realize we are not alone in our loneliness. We are not the first to stand at the edge of this abyss. We are part of a long, distinguished lineage of sensitive souls who have refused to accept easy answers to difficult questions. Let us speak directly now. If you have felt lonely, if you have experienced the kind of alienation we have been describing, if you have known despair, please hear this. These feelings are not evidence that something is wrong with you. They are not symptoms of a disorder that needs to be corrected. They are, from a Dostoevskian perspective, signs of your depth, your sensitivity, your refusal to live on the surface, the pain you feel when you cannot connect authentically with others. This is your soul's protest against superficiality. The despair that sometimes overtakes you on quiet Sunday evenings, this is your spirit crying out for meaning in a world that often offers only distraction. The sense of alienation you feel in social situations where everyone seems to be performing, this is your integrity refusing to perform along with them. In other words, your suffering is not a bug in your system. It is a feature. It is a sign that you are awake in a world where many have chosen sleep. It is a sign that you hunger for depth in a culture that often celebrates the shallow. It is a sign that you are unwilling to accept the ready-made meanings and easy consolations that modern society offers. This does not mean your pain is not real or that it does not need attention. It means that the frame through which you have been viewing it may need to shift. You have perhaps been told, by self-help books, by therapy culture, by well-meaning friends, that if you just think differently, practice gratitude, set boundaries, work on yourself, you will overcome these feelings. And while these tools can be helpful, they can also reinforce a subtle but damaging message that your current state is unacceptable, that you should not be feeling what you are feeling, that you need to fix yourself before you are worthy of love and belonging. Dostoevsky offers a different message. You are already worthy. Your pain is already meaningful. Your struggle is already part of something larger and more profound than personal failure. You do not need to fix yourself. You need to accept yourself in all your contradiction and complexity and suffering. The title of this exploration promises an escape from modern loneliness and despair. But what kind of escape? The escape Dostoevsky offers is not an escape from the feelings themselves. It is an escape from the shame and judgment we heap upon ourselves for having them. It is an escape from the isolation that comes from believing we are the only ones who struggle this way. It is an escape from the exhausting effort of trying to be someone other than who we are. The way to escape the abyss is not to climb out of it, but to learn to sit within it without shame. To look at our loneliness and say, yes, this is part of me. This is part of being human. To look at our despair and say, this too has its place. This too is teaching me something important. This is not resignation. It is radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is not giving up. It is giving in to reality, to truth, to what is actually here rather than what we wish were here. And there is tremendous relief in this. Because once we stop fighting against our own experience, once we stop judging ourselves for our feelings, we can finally begin to be present with ourselves as we actually are. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls the second arrow. When we suffer, that is the first arrow. When we then judge ourselves for suffering, tell ourselves we should not be feeling this way, compare ourselves unfavorably to others who seem to have it together. This is the second arrow. And often, the second arrow causes more pain than the first. Dostoevsky helps us remove the second arrow. He shows us that our feelings of loneliness and despair are not signs of personal failure, but universal human experiences. He gives us permission to suffer without adding judgment to our suffering. And in this permission, there is the beginning of peace. But Dostoevsky does not leave us alone with our acceptance. He offers a path forward, embodied most powerfully in characters like Sonia in Crime and Punishment, and Alyosha in The Brothers Karamazov. These characters stand in stark contrast to the underground man, to Raskolnikov, to Ivan. They are not brilliant intellectuals. They do not have grand theories about life. They are simple, humble, and guided by one principle above all: active love. When Raskolnikov confesses his crime to Sonia, she does not lecture him about morality. She does not judge him or turn away. She kneels with him and weeps. She loves him not in spite of his suffering, but through it. She does not try to fix him. She simply accompanies him in his pain. When Alyosha encounters his brother Ivan's despair, he does not argue with him or try to refute his logic. He kisses him. He offers the simple, wordless comfort of human presence and affection. This is the Dostoevskian antidote to the isolating intellect. Not more thinking, not better theories, not clever solutions, but humble, active love. And here is what this means in our modern context. Active love is the small act of kindness to a stranger, holding a door, offering a genuine smile, asking, "How are you?" and actually listening to the answer. It is choosing in that moment to bridge the gap between yourself and another human being, to acknowledge our shared existence. Active love is being fully present when a friend is in pain, not rushing to offer solutions or silver linings, not trying to cheer them up or minimize their suffering, just sitting with them, letting them know through your presence that they are not alone in their darkness. Active love is forgiving yourself for not being perfect, looking at your own failures and struggles with the same compassion you would extend to a dear friend, treating yourself with the tenderness you deserve simply by virtue of being human. Active love is choosing compassion over judgment, both for others and for yourself. When you see someone struggling, resisting the urge to dismiss them as weak or broken, and instead recognizing a fellow traveler on this difficult journey. This is how we overcome isolation in the deepest sense, not through grand strategies or self-improvement programs, but through small, humble connections that reaffirm our shared humanity, not by becoming extraordinary, but by embracing our ordinariness, not by fixing ourselves, but by accepting ourselves and extending that acceptance to others. This is where philosophy and psychology meet. This is where Dostoevsky's insights become practical wisdom for daily life. The cure for the pain of isolation is not to become more isolated in our efforts at self-improvement. It is to reach out, to connect, to love, imperfectly, hesitantly, but genuinely. And here is the beautiful paradox. When we stop trying so hard to be connected, when we let go of the performance and the anxiety and simply show up as we are, vulnerable, flawed, uncertain, we often find that genuine connection arises naturally. Because what we are offering is what others have been longing for all along. The permission to be real, to be human, to be seen in all our imperfection. The underground man was isolated because he could not stop performing for an imagined audience. Raskolnikov was isolated because he believed he had to be extraordinary. Ivan was isolated because he could not stop thinking long enough to simply be with others. The path through their isolation, and through ours, is the path of humble, active love. It is the willingness to be ordinary, to be present, to connect not despite our suffering, but through it. This is not easy. It requires courage to show up as we are. It requires vulnerability to admit we need others. It requires humility to let go of our theories about how life should be and accept life as it is. But this is the path. This is what Dostoevsky learned through his own suffering, his own mistakes, his own journey through the abyss. And he offers it to us now as a gift, purchased at great cost. The knowledge that we are not alone, that our suffering is meaningful, and that the way forward is through connection, compassion, and love. We have traveled far together through some of the darkest terrain of human experience. We have sat with loneliness and despair. We have met troubled souls who mirror our own struggles. We have looked into the abyss that Dostoevsky knew so well. And now, as we come to the end of this journey, let us rest for a moment with a simple, soothing truth. You feel lonely because you live in a world that often prizes intellect over heart, performance over presence, achievement over being. You feel despair because you are a creature who craves meaning in a universe that sometimes seems to offer none. You feel alienated because you have refused to accept shallow answers to deep questions. These feelings are not evidence of your failure. They are evidence of your depth. Dostoevsky's great gift to us is permission. Permission to be human in all that word entails, to be uncertain, to be contradictory, to suffer, to feel lost. He shows us that it is precisely in the depths of this experience, in what feels like the abyss, that we find our capacity for the greatest love and the most profound connection. That our vulnerability is not our weakness, but our most authentic offering to others. The escape from the tyranny of loneliness is not to become someone who never feels lonely. It is to accept our loneliness as a companion on the journey, to stop fighting it, and to discover that when we sit with it without shame, it begins to transform into something else, into compassion for ourselves and others, into a deeper appreciation for the moments when connection does occur, into wisdom about what truly matters. You do not need to fix yourself before you are worthy of love. You do not need to become extraordinary to deserve belonging. You simply need to show up as you are, imperfect and uncertain and human, and trust that this is enough. Because it is. It always has been. Perhaps the feeling of being in the abyss is not a sign that you are lost. Perhaps it is a sign that you have simply refused to live on the surface. And in that refusal, in that willingness to face the darkness, You honor something sacred, the depth and complexity of your own soul, and the souls of all who suffer alongside you in this strange, difficult, beautiful experience of being human.